Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast exists so that cops can hear encouragement from other cops. Even if you never talk directly to a police chaplain, I'm hoping that you might listen to a chaplain talk to other cops about being a wiser, healthier person. On this podcast, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional sheriff's deputy from Kansas City. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are giving you the wisdom gleaned from their experience so that you don't have to learn the hard way. Marriage in law enforcement seems like a doomed subject sometimes. It's difficult, so people talk as if it's impossible. But I know several long-time married, wise, and successful couples where one or both have been first responders, and they prove that it is absolutely possible to survive an LEO career and keep your marriage. So today we're talking to Erica Davis. Erica married a cop and lived to tell the tale. In fact, I found her teaching classes at a conference about how to provide meaningful help to other LEO wives, and that inspired me to get an interview with her. Here's Erica Davis. Hello, Erica. How are you today?
I'm good, Chaplain. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to get to talk to you again.
Me too.
Yeah, I spoke to you at a conference here a while back, and I took one of your classes, and I thought you did a great job. So I'm happy you said yes to being on the podcast.
Oh, you're so sweet. You were one of the 3 people in my class. No, I'm just kidding.
It was a packed room. I got there a couple minutes late, and it's like there was one seat front and center. And so I literally sat at your feet and listened to you teach for an hour.
We saved that for you.
Probably. Well, it's my punishment for walking in a couple minutes late. But I wanted to talk to you today about advice for a new LEO wife. I feel like that's part of the larger LEO community that gets neglected. And I feel like there's a lot of wisdom that's untapped that we could be sharing. And so maybe we should start first with making a distinction between 2 parallel branches of spouses. The first is somebody who is newlywed to an existing LEO. So somebody just got married to a cop, or they've been married for a long time and their husband just became a cop.
Right.
Can you kind of break those 2 down for me? How are those the same and how are they different?
Yeah, I think it's a really good difference and very different worlds that you're coming from. When I married my husband, he was already a police officer. Mm-hmm. He was already in the community. And so I had to adjust and learn to some of the things that he already did or already had in his mindset, right? So you're marrying a person that I will say over and over, he's already broken by the system, right? They've already done their, not brainwashing, but brainwashing in the nicest way to say brainwashing. They've already created the guy that they want, and I'm choosing to marry him. And then there's a very different situation when you've already committed your lives together and you've already made a family unit, and then you choose to enter into the world of law enforcement.
Is that bait and switch? I mean, that's tough. If you married a shoe salesman and then he becomes a cop, I mean, is that fair? Is that?
Yeah, it is a unique thing. And I definitely think that there's a lot of challenges, but I also think sometimes what we see it as negative, at least you're going through it together. Where a spouse who's coming in is behind the curveball when their spouse is already in it. They don't know what it's like to enter this family, this crazy, huge, thin blue line family.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Where if you're entering it together, at least you're going through the steps together. Your husband comes home and goes, "Do you know what they do?" Right? Like that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. You get to go through that learning curve at the same time, approximately. Right. Yeah. Versus coming in and being initiated by yourself and one step removed. I mean, that's got to be pretty difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the biggest distinction that we need to remember, and that the officer who's bringing in a spouse at either point needs to remember that those are two different paths, and what you're sharing and how you're sharing it is going to be very different.
Which do you think is better? Maybe, and let me define better. Which one is easier to cope with, do you think?
I think that they each have their own challenges. And I think a lot of it is going to go back to being strong in your marriage regardless, right?
Okay.
Each way, I think, is going to require a different level of commitment. I think if you married somebody who wasn't in the industry and then they joined, as long as you had those conversations way ahead of that happening and you know what you're doing, that can be very successful. I think personally, I do think it might be a little bit easier if you're breaking in and they're already in it, because you already do know some of the things. So,
okay. So have you ever envied, like, oh, I wish I had been on the other end of this or on the other side of the fence?
Yeah, I've definitely met and mentored couples who are doing it the other way, who are entering. And I think coming in with your eyes open, heck yeah, I can think about sometimes when I'm like, oh, if I had known that beforehand, I would have made so many different choices, or I would have done things a little bit different. So yeah, there's a little bit of jealousy. Maybe that's it. When you said it's just better, it's just what I'm more jealous of.
Right. Well, I imagine they might be envious of you that you knew you were marrying a cop. You went through the process of courting and the wedding and into the marriage, knowing what you were going to get. This is a cop. He's already been doing this for a while. This was a known entity. And even though you were not specifically a sworn officer, and so you had to play some catch up, at least you knew what you were getting. And so there's pros and cons, I'm sure, on both sides.
Grass is always greener, right?
That's right. Okay, so help me out here, because I'm not married to a cop. What is the attraction? Why do people put themselves in this spot to be married to a police officer?
People ask that so often. I think there's lots of things. Overall, law enforcement officers in general are caring. They're compassionate. They're giving. They put others first. Like, there's so many good characteristics that are pre-screened by the hiring process.
Yeah.
I joke with my husband as well that he also passed drug screening and a psychological exam. So I knew that there was some good right there. We joke about that a lot. But I think that the characteristics that make a good cop also make a good spouse. They really do. And so that is very attractive.
What are the advantages or what are the disadvantages to also being a first responder? What if you are also a police officer or a firefighter or a dispatcher or a nurse? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages?
So I was a dispatcher when I married my husband. I hear all of you groaning in your patrol cars.
Oh, one of these. Yeah.
That's funny. It is such a cliche to some extent. I think some of the advantages to being in the industry as well come with just a level of being able to understand the language, some of the less common and just more instinct-based things that are happening, that it's hard even for the Leo to tell you why he or she is doing what they're doing. And when you're in it, you're like, well, I know why they're doing it because I have a piece of that, or I understand that.
Did your husband ever start explaining something that he didn't need to explain because you already knew?
Oh, that's a good question. So there was definitely some things where he would talk about like a specific assignment. Like, I was thinking about doing, canine, and he's like, but that would require that and I was like, I know exactly. Like, are you kidding me? Yeah, that definitely happens. That's funny. I hadn't really thought about that in a long time, but yeah, there's some of that happens. But I think overall, it would be the opposite more. He would expect me to know something. That I would be like, what are you talking about? And he'd be like, how do you not know that? You work at the same place, kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm almost amazed just interviewing police officers in general, how expert they can be about what they do. I mean, detailed knowledge, and be completely ignorant of what's happening like in the next office I
Sure.
mean, another officer in the same building's got a job, and I got no idea what that guy does. And I'm
Sure.
always, because I always try to get information. It's like, no, I don't know. I just know my job. And so,
Right. Yeah, that they definitely build some of that. And the bigger the department, the easier it is to fall into that. But I definitely could see that happening. But I think overall, the benefit of being in it is understanding the concept. I also understood the level of danger differently being in it, if that makes sense. And I can explain that a little bit because that's like kind of a weird statement to make. But when I talk to a lot of other wives, they say like, he gets in his car and he leaves and I don't know what happens for 10 hours, 12 hours. And he comes home and he's really angry. And that's my understanding of the job. And being in dispatch, I'd be like, oh, no, I understand. He had 18 calls pending when he started his shift. He got behind because such and such didn't do their job the night before. And, he's running from call to call. And then something big happens and he didn't get to eat his lunch, or he bought Wendy's and the chili spilled because he was doing this. Right. I have a different understanding about what the day looked like, even if I wasn't working that day.
Right.
I had a clear understanding of what a shift looked like.
Yeah.
And
every interaction you've had with an officer has informed what you might imagine your husband going through.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I wasn't thinking that it was some TV show where they're running, SWAT call to call, where it's just shots fired and they kill somebody and then they go right back to work and there's no paperwork and I understand that that's not what's happening.
Right.
I understand that actually if they were involved in a critical incident, they probably do have time to call home, to be honest, because they're removed from the critical incident, right? Like so many times, like if they were involved in an officer shooting, he can call me as long as he's okay because he's going to have that opportunity. But a new wife doesn't know that, or somebody that's not in the industry. They're thinking, well, he's not going to call me. So I'm thinking he's, in it. And I'm like, no, I know. And we also had the forced thought to set up some of that ahead of time because I knew it, where I'd be like, oh, I know that you have 5 seconds to send me a text that says, I'm okay.
Right.
Even if, and so, that was something we set up very early in our marriage of I don't care what is happening. You will send it. And because if I see it on TV first, we're going to have a conversation at the dinner table, right? Like,
is that an easy negotiation to ask for that?
It really was easy.
Good.
He didn't get it at first. I will be honest. That was not something that he had ever thought about because he's like, well, if I'm not okay, you'll know. In his head, that was kind of his philosophy. But I was like, listen, even if the neighboring jurisdiction, let's say, gets in a shooting, I want a text that says I'm okay.
Yeah. Because
I'm going to see it on the news that an officer, and let's be honest, the news does not do a great job of helping me. All I hear is an officer was involved in a shooting. I want a text. You don't have to tell me the details. You don't have to tell me anything else.
Yeah.
But an I'm okay text. And so, I mean, if you looked at our text thread, you would see thousands of I'm okay. And I'd be like, I didn't even know it was happening. I was, doing my own thing or whatever.
But they're still valuable. That's a valuable communication. Absolutely.
Huge thing for us to be where I felt better. And I would recommend it to everyone.
What are the disadvantages to working in the same place or in the same field?
So many. Let's see. I think it can really quickly absorb your entire life. And you have to work really hard to have a life outside of work because you can come home and you can talk about work and you can talk about cases and you can talk about all kinds of things. And it can just absorb everything.
Well, and there's twice as much because you really should be debriefing both first responders, which means it takes twice as long to unpack both days. Yeah.
And it can cause little arguments about things that don't matter because I thought I was right and he thought he was right, or he thought patrol was right and I thought communications was right? That can absolutely happen. I was like, why are we bickering about work? That's ridiculous. Shift work is hard on marriages. And so when you have two people doing shift work, now you have twice the hardness on your marriage. And if you have children, it's twice as hard on your kids. There's also not just the Leo drama, but there's office drama, right? Yeah. In any police department. That's not being a police officer, it's just having a job. Yeah. And when you're doing it at the same department, especially, or in departments that are intertwined, like maybe a sheriff's office and a police department, or the ER within that community.
Yeah.
You know all the same drama and all the same politics.
Yeah, twice the opportunity for that drama to stick to you somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which officer's making bad choices, or which person's doing this, and then suddenly you're sucked in, and you can be sucked in on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
Well, she said, well, he said, and then you're suddenly like, why is their drama entering our marriage, right?
Yeah.
So those are all things that are hard. And then I also think, and I don't try and pull the, feminist card or the women in law enforcement card very often, but I will here in the sense that women have it a little bit different than men in the industry specifically. And so then there are some of those things that come in where I would say, well, you don't know because you're not a woman.
Right.
And so you don't know what I faced. And that would cause a little bit of tension, or could cause a little bit of tension. And I've definitely seen it in other relationships. We have friends who are both police officers, and she would say, well, you don't know what it's like because you're 6 foot tall, 215 pounds. And so when you walk into a room, people do what you say. Mm-hmm. When I walk into a room, I have to earn my spot, and then get bashed for earning my spot, right? All you do is talk. Da, 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 da. So there's that little bit. And even in communications versus patrol, we had some of that in our marriage where I'd be like, don't devalue the extra steps I have to do.
All right. So let's talk to the new wives, and I really am focused on the females because law enforcement is so predominantly male.
Right.
Let's talk to the new LEO wives, and this is regardless of how they came into it. They're just in their first few years of being married to a cop. What kind of things should they be looking out for? What is your advice to them generally? I mean, let's rattle off the first few things you think of. What do you think is really important for them to understand?
You've entered into a new family, and all of that dynamics comes with, you thought you were getting a set of in-laws, and you actually got like 64 in-laws, depending on the size of your department, right?
Right.
Like, you've got a shift of people or a team of people, regardless of how big your department is, that are suddenly in your life, whether you want them there or not. And understanding that dynamic, it takes practice, and I think it takes a willingness to jump in and be part of it. So I always suggest to people that they honestly try and become involved in this family that is their department.
So in law enforcement, these careers happen in a relatively compact way and at high speed. Right. And what I mean by that is that even though there will be a few people that go through the academy with your husband and through his entire career, and they've known each other for 25, 30 years, there's others that come in, whether they're superiors, peers, or subordinates. They will come in, be there for just a moment, and then gone forever. Right. And they were so important for about 5 minutes. Right. And then they're not there anymore. And why don't we ever see so-and-so anymore? Well, they moved on, or they got fired, or whatever. Yeah. Is there any way to help the wife play catch up when all of these personnel changes are happening and not all that's getting reported back home? Yeah. So how does the wife know who you're allowed to call or text anymore?
Right. Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think one of the things that my husband and I did is we stayed really involved in each other's shift bid and just bidding process in general and kind of shifting in general. Like, hey, what's that gonna look like? And how are we going to make those decisions? Obviously, across America, there are people listening who work at a department and they're like, what is a shift bid? We only have 5 guys. And I get that. Right. But there is more people that have this idea, right? You're bidding a shift and you're moving, and you're right. Like, that means a new sergeant, and that means 4 new guys or 5 new guys or whatever to your team. But the quicker you understand how that happens, the easier it is to figure out when that happens. When you're trying to learn it on the fly, it is much harder. So ask your husband what does it look like? How do you get assigned to a shift? What is that going to look like? And when does that change? Do you change every 6 months, 4 months, once a year? Can you stay there forever? Like, what is that going to look like? For so many reasons. But one of those is the connections.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, are you going to pick your shift based on what our family needs? Are you going to pick it based on what sergeant's leading that shift? Are you going to what would be ideal for you, and how's that going to work? Because that's also going to change your whole philosophy on who you're connected with, right?
How aggressively do you, as the spouse, try to meet those people, especially if your husband's working with a female?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So when I've been with my husband through multiple assignments, special assignments, also through the ranks, he just retired last month as a chief of police. So we've done it all. But when he was a patrol officer and we were newly married, we made it a really big point to at least know people, their face and their name at least once. A shift meeting, a dinner out, a, get together of some proportion. And one of the reasons was I knew that in the event that something went wrong, those were the people that were going to show up at my door.
Right.
And I don't want to meet them for the first time.
Right.
When
in a crisis. Right.
The chief, okay, who cares? Who cares about the chief? And I was married to a chief, so I can say that. But like the people that are there, that's who I want to know. I want to at least meet the sergeant who's leading that shift and be able to recognize his face. And then in our marriage, then my husband, we would always say, talk about them by their name, so that when you're telling me a story,
right,
I can put it all together in my head
and feel not connected to it, and involved,
and feel that feel that connection. Absolutely. So I think it's really important. And we did the same thing, which was always, fun for our marriage, was he knew who I was working with as well. Just because, again, when I'm like frustrated and I'm like, oh, do you know what she did, versus identifying, a person, and he's like, oh yeah, well, remember, she has this good quality, and he could be a good loving spouse, not just a fellow coworker bashing people. Right.
Do you have advice for how to manage maybe the jealousy that your husband has to be gone for 8, 10, 12 hours at a time, but he's spending time with these buddies and, like I said, sometimes female coworkers? Is there a way to feel better about that?
Ooh, feel better. I don't know if there's a way to feel better. I think it's natural to have some of those feelings. I think some of the things that you choose in your marriage, we never used the term work spouse in our marriage. That was something that we chose not to do.
Totally agree.
We said it, like, we're not going to have work spouses, whether it's a joke, whether it's two men that joke about it, right? Like, no, my spouse is my spouse. And that's an important relationship distinction.
Yeah, it's sacred to you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that comes a lot from, growing up in church and having that as a thing. But I think that's a really important thing. And then identifying limits. That was always an important thing in our marriage as well. We go to a big church. And so a lot of people that we work with also go to our big church. But that doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but we don't have to be in small group with those same people. If you choose to be, then it should be your choice as a married couple. But for us, we chose maybe that wasn't going to always be our life, that we were going to identify with the season we were in. When our kids were little, we were doing things like that. So I think a lot of that comes with communication ahead of time, because you're not going to be able to decide who his shift partner is. Yeah. Sorry, ladies, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. If his car partner is a woman, that's great. You know what? There's a lot of reasons you want his car partner to be a woman to save his butt in times that you need to. It's important that you establish those things ahead of time. Those conversations need to be happening at home and need to just be happening. Let's be honest, instead of just letting things go. Because I will say, in the Leo world, police officers prioritize everything at all times. That's their training that kicks in at all times. And so if the conversation isn't a priority, it just keeps getting moved down the list, down, because to them, it's not a priority. So prioritize those conversations, prioritize the way it is. We definitely have run into people in our respective careers where, and I will say it's probably more me than my husband, which is funny, but like, where I've been like, she's so fun, I'm going to hang out with her. And he's like, this is not good for us. Right? Like,
right.
And I will say, in like the warning capacity, also being aware that marriage and divorce kind of tend to go in like hills and valleys in law enforcement. Everybody at the police department gets married in like an 8-month window.
Yeah.
And then everybody.
It's like it's contagious. Yeah.
I just used air quotes. I know you can't see me, but everybody gets a divorce. And that's really easy to get swooped into these like feelings and discussions. And that was another thing my husband and I had a discussion about. Like, if everybody on your shift is getting a divorce, maybe we need to spend less time with everybody until that's done, because we need to prioritize what we're doing versus going with the flow of everybody else. But those are conversations that have to take place.
I keep hearing on each one of these issues that talking and having good communication seems to be the very first medicine you take each time. It's the preventive medicine. It is the first course, first recourse of what you need to do to help fix a problem is communicate. And
it won't come naturally. So that's
you've got to make it happen.
You're going to have to remember that is not what they're being trained to do in their job. Yes, they communicate, but they give orders and people listen. And that's a very big difference than having a conversation with your spouse. So it's a choice to have those conversations, and it is necessary to have a marriage that lasts through law enforcement. For sure.
What do you do when your spouse comes home? You actually referenced it earlier. Your spouse comes home tired. Your spouse spent maybe, like if they're in patrol, they spent 8, 10, 12 hours solving other people's problems. And that emotional energy is depleted. It is gone when they get home. They have used up all of their problem-solving energy for the day. Yep. How do you then say, okay, well, let's unpack this and let's talk and let's communicate? How do you get them to do that when they're worn out on it?
You can't do it then.
Okay.
That's a really good point. It really is. So decision fatigue has fully set in every law enforcement officer's brain by the time they get home. They've made decision after decision after decision. And then you're like, what do you want for dinner? They're like, I can't. Right. Like, and I think that's a normal marriage thing, but it's even amplified in law enforcement. Like, you're like, I cannot make another decision. I don't care. We can eat cardboard for all I care if I just don't have to decide. So I think those conversations have to be planned and scheduled. We absolutely are huge advocates for dating each other through marriage, making time, and having those conversations and having that. It's not going to happen at the end of the shift. At the end of the shift is not the time for anything more than decompressing and sometimes just fun. Like, because you can't even have a serious conversation. So I would say those are days off conversations that need to be taken.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah. If it's too difficult at the end of a shift, and even a date may not be the right place. So days off, you're going to have to deliberately schedule. We're going to talk about stuff for preventative maintenance to help repair little hiccups that we've had, to solve big problems. You're going to have to schedule that on a day off.
Yep, on a day off or before your shift starts. So a lot of my marriage, I almost was like me. Yeah, he's in it. A lot of our marriage, we worked opposite days off on purpose for our childcare situation. But if we had 40 minutes before work started, that would be an okay time to have those conversations.
Okay. That's good.
All your stuff sets in, with the caveat that you be careful that you don't send them to work thinking about anything but work either, right? You've got to have a carved out time and a period where you can say, okay, we're good. We're okay. We're going to move forward or whatever. But we did a lot of those. I worked a lot of second shift. So, like an earlier morning kind of thing to work those in work as well. But,
you want to be careful not to send your spouse to work on a fight. That's a bad note to send them to work on. Yeah,
you'll feel pretty guilty too if something happens. So don't do that. You've entered into a world that some people hate and that you're going to lose friends, that you've entered into a world that some people revere and respect and not everybody does. It's a whole shifting of your world. I think that's the key. Like, most families do not have to deal with a loved one seeing dead bodies on a regular basis.
Right.
You do. Welcome to your new world. You do. Most people do not have to deal with their husband being called bad names daily. You do. Welcome to your new life. Most people don't have to worry about their husband being shot. You do. These are things.
And not even just being shot, but getting in fights.
Yes.
There's use of force that's much lower level, where, I mean, most jobs, most accountants don't go to the office and wrestle somebody.
Right.
I mean, but that happens in police work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The injuries, the stories of getting called, Steve is in the ER. He's fine, but
Yeah.
Those are way more frequent than them. I've never, praise God, had anybody show up at my door to say he's critically injured. But I've definitely gotten the calls that says he has a broken bone, he has a cut, he has a laceration.
Oh yeah.
He got tased inadvertently. Definitely maced inadvertently or through that. He needs a clean uniform because, all of these things happen. All of those calls will happen, and that is not a normal job.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Not to mention the fact that everything that happens in the department impacts them, which is different than every job. Maybe they weren't even the ones that were involved in the excessive force, but they have to deal with the ramifications of being accused of all of it, right? And so then you're like, wait, that wasn't even your call. Why are you having to deal with that? And the emotions that come with it and the fears and the things. I don't know of any other job where wives tap their husband's chest to make sure they have their vest on, but that's something I do. So there's a lot of that comes into play that I think understanding that and then finding other people who can help you understand that. You're not going to be able to talk to your best friend from high school whose husband is an accountant and have them understand that.
No. In fact, that might be counterproductive. It's
not going to work. And a lot of that has to do also with mentality. My husband, says or does this. And I'm thinking to myself, I know that my husband has been trained not to do such and such, right?
Right.
And that affects my marriage, right? And so the listening skills and the de-escalation skills, I joke all the time with my husband. I'll say, do not CIT me right now. You let me have my moment, but don't you go all trying to talk me off the ledge. Be a husband. And that's unique. And that's stuff that you don't know until you're in it.
Yeah. It's a culture shock.
That is so hard. So hard.
Now, so let me ask one last question then. In the past, there used to exist at most agencies of any size a formal organization of wives that could support one another. Some places still have groups like that, but a lot don't.
Yeah.
Where does somebody who's a brand new LEO wife, where did they go for support that's good and healthy and constructive?
Yeah, great question. So one of the reasons I was so excited that you invited me on your podcast is you're a chaplain, and I think that's one place to start. Chaplains are connected people, which is awesome because they're going to have some connections. And if you're a chaplain and you're listening and you don't have those connections, go get those connections.
Go get them, yeah.
So that you can help us, right? If you're at a bigger agency and your partner is a patrol officer, your sergeant's wife, that first level ahead of you, they're going to have years more experience just based on the way that it works to get promoted. They're going to have some connections. Otherwise, I would avoid other police officers because that creates connections that are not healthy for your marriage. Yeah. So going to his shift partner is not going to be helpful in your marriage or in any kind of temptation to do those kind of things. So that's what I would avoid. And I think church and small groups and being able to talk to people who go, I know somebody, my cousin is and they start connecting you in the world. I also early on realized firefighters' wives have a lot of similarities.
Yes.
EMS and paramedics, very similar. Nurses in the ER, really great resource. So as long as you let your world kind of expand a tiny bit into that whole first responder, those spouses are going to have at least some connections.
Yeah. They're going to be able to help and support, and there might be some mutual support there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And I'm old, so I'm not a huge user of social media, but I know a lot of these younger wives that are coming in are. Mm-hmm. And I love connecting through some of those groups that are protected and private, as long as you're picking the groups that are focused on helping, right? You don't want to just get into a gossip group, because that's not going to help your marriage. Military families have a lot of really good experiences to share as well that can help with some understanding of those things. So connect with a Facebook group, a small group, and if you don't have it at your agency, ask some other wives to start. One of the things I'm a big advocate for is like, hey, I'll watch your kids if you watch mine, because our schedules are the same, right? We have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday off. Ain't no grandma want to watch their kid on a Wednesday night after they've already been working, right? But if Wednesday's my day off as well, I can watch your kids while you guys go on a date night. So having some of those relationships where you facilitate it coming from that standpoint, if you have kids, can really be helpful as well.
I would add that whether you're looking for a specific, like a one-person mentor, or whether you're looking for a group, beware of people who are down on marriage. Because you can find individuals and groups that are like, all cops are horrible, you need to divorce your husband immediately. That's not helpful. Find somebody who's pro-marriage that can give constructive advice. And unfortunately, when you go looking, you're going to run into other disgruntled people who are looking to just be in that echo chamber of negativity. And if you find that you're in that, whether it's face-to-face or online, turn around, run away. You don't want to get caught up in that, because that's just destructive and negative and doesn't help anybody. I
couldn't agree more. Like, to find people that are pro-marriage, pro your marriage surviving, not just telling you that it's hard all the time. There's so many great things about being married that make my life better, and having people that encourage that. That's amazing.
So let me ask, has it been worth it to be married to a cop?
It's been totally worth it.
Awesome.
100% worth it. Did it change my life view on many things? Absolutely. But do I see people that I would have never seen before? I think yes. Like, see the world in a new way.
That's great. Thank you, Erica. I appreciate it so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Erica for her wisdom and being willing to come on the show and share it. It is absolutely possible to have a happy and long-lasting marriage to a cop. It happens all the time, but it never happens on accident. I tell recruits in the police academy that you need to go learn different things from different people. Compartmentalize it. So from one mentor, you're going to learn good report writing. From another one, you'll learn how to find stolen cars. But then you go and find that one officer who's been married to the same person for 25 years, and you go learn that skill too. Don't fall into the self-fulfilling prophecy that all cop marriages end in divorce, so why try? Lots of LEO couples work hard at marriage, and they find wonderful, satisfying success. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
So he's even spooked, but, I'm kind of leaning on my old school sergeant. He seems okay, so we leave. Well, as we go outside, the old lady's son shows up. He's probably in his 40s or 50s. And we tell him, hey, we checked the house. Everything seems okay. Would you like to come in just double check? And he said adamantly, I will never set foot in that house again. I grew up in that house. He said that house is haunted, scares the death out of me. I've tried to get her out of this house, but she's like attached to it. And he would not, visible fear on his face, would not even go into this house during broad daylight, 7 o'clock on a summer afternoon.
Yeah.
Would not go in that house.
This show is commercial free because listeners who feel like they've received some value from Hey Chaplain return the favor by buying me a virtual coffee at buymeacoffee.com/HeyChaplain. You don't have to do that, but thank you. It means the world to me. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city. My goal is each interview to get a person to say, hey, that's a great question. And you said it like 3 times. And so I was like, yeah.
Well, you asked great questions. So that was easy.
Well, thank you.